real depression. Now, it's not going to be, perhaps it won't look like the one in the Great Depression. There'll be some differences, but a depression nevertheless. What do you think?
Well, chapter 7 of my 2007 book is depression, and chapter 8 is hyperinflation. So I guess you could say we're on the same wavelength here.
I guess we are. All right. I think for the audience, what we can do, or should try to do, is to start out by saying, how the hell did we get here? Boy, it happened fast, Michael. America was so big, and our economy so giant, our military, well, it still is, but we were just so big. For this to happen this quickly astounded me. How did we get to this point?
Well, I have to tell you, even for me, and I certainly saw things unraveling, even for me it's been astounding. I think a lot of it has to do with the way the world got more connected. Originally, that was supposed to be a good idea, that you bring everybody into the party, and it reduces risk, and it makes everybody sort of share the pain and share the gain. But what they carry on?
No, go ahead.
Oh, but what they forgot to sort of take into account is there's this general idea that when you get the kinds of shocks that we've seen recently, the kinds of imbalances that preceded those shocks, and you have this world that's connected very intricately, like a spider web, so to speak, that little vibrations in one part of it end up vibrating across the whole net. So all of this sort of benefit of say, globalization and of getting countries and companies and individuals tied tightly together proved to be sort of the complete opposite once circumstances turned for the worse, which historically, whether you were sort of a doom and gloomer or whether you were just a pure student of history, markets and economies ebb and flow. You get downturns, you get upturns, and everyone forgot about the fact that you get downturns.
Well, of course, in most of our lifetimes, we've been through downturns before. We've had recessions, and we've come up and out of the recessions. What we're in right now feels unlike anything I've been through in my lifetime, and I guess it is. It's not a normal recession, is it?
No, certainly not. I mean, typically recessions are sort of pauses, if you like, in the general trend of things. I think a depression is a real. I guess the word that's used is sort of unraveling. It's a deleveraging. It's a wiping away of all the excesses that had built up over time, and there were some extraordinary excesses in terms of the total level of debt that existed, something on the order of 3.5 times the size of the economy in the U.S. That was the largest number, in fact, a record number, but the largest record since the Great Depression era. You had this structural imbalance between the U.S. and the rest of the world, where we're spending more than we were making. We were financing through our debts through other countries like China. There was tremendous distortions in the investment world. People were taking on huge amounts of leverage and making gigantic, risky bets across the globe. So you had a combination of factors that were sort of the dynamite sitting next to the lit fuse, and that lit fuse happened, in my view at least, happened to be a dose of reality, dose of economic reality, and also I guess we reached a sort of tipping point in terms of how much more people could take. And unfortunately, history suggests that these kinds of events are long-lasting. The financial crises in and of themselves tend to have a more dramatic effect on the economy than a straightforward downturn like we saw maybe in 2001 or 1990. But the other side of it is that people were living as though there was no tomorrow. Savings rates were historically low. Debt levels were extraordinarily high. People's sense of what they could afford kind of got lost in translation. And in a way, I guess you could say depressions bring reality back to everyone.
What define in the modern day, if you can, Michael, what you think a depression is going to look like?
Well, Well, I think that the classic image, sort of from an economic view, actually there's a lot of debate about what it really means. But in essence, it's an extended period of economic contraction, typically accompanied by deflation. In other words, falling prices for different assets, house prices, for example. We've seen that. A general, I think the number that people throw around is sort of a 10% shrinking in the size of the economy, or in terms of the extent of the economy. So that's a sort of one perspective. But the other is I think a mindset change. One of the interesting things about now, as opposed to previous recessions, is that people are changing their attitudes about spending. I mean, the sort of religion of consumerism seems to be dying, if it's not dead already. There's a sort of a new frugality, even among young people. It's no longer the best idea to have a sort of the latest and greatest and the most expensive. In fact, it's almost a game now to see who can get by finding the cheapest and and using things for the longest. So that mindset change, in my view, is a integral part of it. People are changing their attitudes because they expect this to last, instead of saying, we'll get through it and then we'll be back to normal.
Right. Why now? What was was it Lehman? Was it, if Lehman had not happened, if they had somehow propped up Lehman, where would we be today, do you think?
It would have been somebody else. I mean, the problem is that Lehman, in a sense, it's kind of random who goes. The interesting thing that people don't sort of maybe aren't aware of is during the Great Depression, for example, many banks failed. But many good banks failed with bad banks. There's an element of randomness to it, because of the whole notion of credit. It's very dependent on confidence. It's very dependent on who your relationships are, which is, again, there's an element of randomness to that. So sometimes if people get the wrong idea about a firm, and that idea spreads, and you're in an environment where people are sort of worried and open to such ideas, you can easily destroy a good institution in the kind of time span that Lehman fell, as much as you can destroy a bad institution. So the depressionary forces aren't really that discriminating.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at our two largest banks, Bank of America and Citigroup. Is that the case there? Are we destroying good institutions because of a stampede of short selling, or what's going on? Or is the current market price well deserved and perhaps ought to be even zero right now?
Well, I think it's the latter. I have a sort of, I believe short selling actually is a value to the markets, and I've been 25 years in markets. I've been short, I've been long, I play both sides, and I think there's value. But aside from that, the truth is, I think some of the experts out there have acknowledged that the administration hasn't, and the industry hasn't, and to a certain extent the media hasn't, but the industry is effectively bankrupt. Certainly at the upper tier, the sort of large money center, global type banks,
right.
There may be some exceptions there, or there's maybe some in better shape, but for all practical purposes, our banking system, the largest players are insolvent. So whether people want to acknowledge that, whether we want to play games with Washington, adjusting accounting rules and adjusting the extent to which they bail out certain firms and come up with all sorts of sort of magic tricks out of the hat, it doesn't change the reality. I mean, these institutions had slivers of capital. They had huge risky exposures, plenty of it in the real estate game. The fact is that real estate prices have fallen. It's made their assets worth less, and ultimately that's like any business. So your assets fall below, fall to a point where you're essentially worth nothing.
Is it going to keep? Are real estate prices going to keep falling?
Well, one model I like to look at, and again, yes is the answer, but to put it in a context, let's just say that my views, which are certainly at one end of the spectrum, some view them as perhaps a little over the top, but if you look at the sort of last comparable type bubble, which is in Los Angeles in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, if you just overlaid a graph of what happened to house